If you watch a lot of anime and if you rely on subtitles to understand this anime, stay tuned because I'm going to shatter your world. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm Sarah, an anime and game translator. I loved anime so much as a teenager that I decided to translate it professionally. And in addition to translating it, I do still watch it and I do read the subtitles because I kind of can't help it, but also because it helps me gain insights on how other people translate the anime. In some cases, I learn of how to do things well, and in some cases, I learn how not to do things well. Let's get started. So the first mistake I see in anime subtitles is when a character refers to another character by their last name, if we just would not do that in English. So a lot of the times people feel like they have to keep that part intact and the same as it was in Japanese. If Ken calls his friend Shota Yamamoto, if he calls him by his last name Yamamoto instead of Shota, they feel like, okay, well, we have to keep that he calls him Yamamoto, not Shota, even though his name is Shota. Maybe the other characters call him Shota, but this guy calls him Yamamoto. Now in Japan, that's a little more significant, that difference. In English though, it's not quite the same. So in English, if we call someone by just their last name, that's more something you do if you're a jock. It's kind of, it is sort of a bro thing to do, to like call someone by their last name. Or sometimes you'll call someone by their last name because there's like, with me, Sarah, extremely common name. So if there's two Sarahs in a group, one of them is Sarah, the other one is Sarah last name. And I was usually the one who had to be Sarah last name because I was always considered the other Sarah, not the primary Sarah, which was really good for my self-esteem. But yeah, to call someone by just their last name in English, it can come across as a little silly and a little just unnatural, depending on who you are. Like, unless you're bros, unless you're really the type of people that would call somebody by just their last name, it's weird. And in Japan, it's not as weird to just call somebody by their last name, or to call their last name followed by an honorific, san, chan, kun, sama, etc. And if you see my first version of this video, you know how I feel about honorifics already. But yeah, not only is it sometimes the unnatural way for a character to call another character if this were originally in English, but the other problem that I have with using a last name for a character is it winds up just being really confusing. As a viewer, you have to learn like everybody's first and last name in the cast to understand who anyone is ever talking about. And instead of, if there's a cast of 20, instead of having to learn 20 names, now you have to learn 40 names. And it's just really, really difficult to keep track of everybody if sometimes a character is called by their last name, sometimes a character is called by their first name. So I think for clarity, consistency, and just sounding a little more like it was originally written in English, I think it makes more sense to use a character's first name as much as possible, or to use their last name as much as possible if that's how all the characters consistently refer to that character. Be consistent is my main note there. My second mistake that I see in subtitles, and this pretty much only really applies to fan subbed works, is excessive swearing. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not against swearing at all. However, younger translators and amateur translators tend to feel the need to just spice up their translations with a lot of swear words thrown in. They tend to just interpret Japanese in the most vulgar way that they possibly can. I have a couple videos about swearing and how I translate it and how it is really not at all like English swearing is. So when I see excessive profanity in translations, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit. That's not quite authentic. On the flip side though, a problem that I see in commercially released anime is not enough swearing. So I understand that anime companies, they're businesses, they want to make money, they don't want to offend people. It's always better to err on the side of less swearing so that you can have a bigger audience and not offend people and everything. But in exchange, sometimes you're sacrificing a character's personality for it. If it's a character that would definitely be swearing in a scene and then they're not swearing because you're not allowed to use anything, like you're not even allowed to put damn into your translation, then that's kind of a problem. That character comes across as really fake. And sometimes this is the fault of the translator if the translator personally has hang-ups against profanity and just refuses and wants to censor it. I remember once I was translating for a fan-subbing group in the past who would refuse to even have hell or damn in their subtitles. And when I had them in my translations, they'd like put them out with asterisks. And I'm like, if you're going to put them out with asterisks, I'd rather just translate it in a way that has no profanity to begin with, because it's really distracting to have asterisks in your subtitles where a swear word should be. But usually, if there is not enough swearing, or something was totally a swear word, but it was not translated as swear word, usually the reason why that happens is because the client, the company that the translator is translating for, has specifically given instructions, hey, no profanity at all, or keep your profanity to PG level. So the fourth mistake I see is not entirely a mistake, but again, it's just kind of an unfortunate artistic difference. And that is a lack of contemporary slang in the translations. So typically, as a translator, you are discouraged, and I'd say it's a general rule of translating to try to keep them as neutral as possible in terms of like dated slang. You want your translations to be a little more neutral and a little more timeless, so that if somebody is watching this thing that you translated in the 80s, they're not going to be like, it's not going to be riddled with extremely dated slang that's going to then take people out of your translation and just be laughing at the dated slang in it. However, I feel that if you're translating a work that itself is very contemporary, and that itself in the original Japanese had some contemporary language, some very like year-specific slang, or sometimes if there's like a year-specific slang in English that just would be such a perfect translation for the Japanese concept. I really wish that we could just go ahead and use extremely contemporary slang in those cases. One example, it's not a very good example, but it's the only one that I can think of at the moment, is the term Lifehack. It's kind of new, it's kind of slangy, it's kind of contemporary slangy, it's kind of internet-y, kind of meme-speaky. And it happens to be an absolutely perfect translation for the Japanese word urawaza. When I first encountered the word urawaza, I couldn't really think of any good equivalent in English for what it actually means, but life hack is like perfect. Perfect translation for it. And I would probably be allowed to use life hack for urawaza in a translation. So like I said, it's not a very good example, but it's kind of showing a little bit of what I mean by this. So the fifth mistake I see in subtitles, and again, it's not so much a mistake as it is just artistic differences, is when the translator is forced to use terminology predetermined by the Japanese company. So sometimes there are catchphrases, sometimes there are terms that come up in the anime that are anime specific, and the Japanese company has already decided what they want those to be in English, and they're just not necessarily, bless their hearts, they're just not the best translators into English because they're not native, and they're just not good translations, not the best translations. So if you're watching an anime series and you're ever thinking, God, that catchphrase sounds really weird, or God, that term that they're using for that weapon they use is just really not right, not appropriate, it might be not because the translator was a bad translator, but because the original Japanese client had bad translators. Now, sometimes I've been fortunate enough to work in close collaboration with the Japanese company, especially when we're working on a pilot for an anime series. We can actually communicate back and forth and try to really hash out those catchphrases, those terms, to make sure that they're really good from the get-go, but that's not always the case. So the next few examples I have are more linguistic and more about the craft of translating and localization. And the sixth mistake that I see in anime subtitles is either positive tense sentences being kept in the positive tense when they should have been transformed into negative tense, or vice versa. So that probably did not make any sense on its own, so I'm going to explain it with some examples. So if a character is on a shugakuryoko, a school excursion, and her classmates are gabbing and talking really loudly into the wee hours of the morning, and she's trying to sleep, totally not speaking from personal experience, and she grumbles from her futon, "Ichichi urusei na." If one were to translate that literally, and this is how I sometimes see it in anime subtitles, it would be translated as, "You're too noisy." However, that's not entirely a natural way of expressing that sentiment. Yes, the sentiment and what I literally did say is, yeah, you're really noisy. But what I'm really saying, and what I would say in English, is shut up or shut your trap, which is the opposite of you're noisy, or it is the next conclusion from you're noisy. You are noisy, so you should stop being noisy. Stop being noisy. Shut your trap. Another example that's very common in shoujo anime, because it is a little romantic, if you have the, male character and the female character, and they're sitting on a park bench outdoors and it's autumn or whatever, and maybe she hugs herself slightly and he'll say, "Samgunai ka?" The way that might be translated, if it were more literal, is, "Are you cold?" or "Aren't you cold?" And that is literally what that phrase means. But we wouldn't necessarily say it that way. We might. Sometimes you'll say, "Aren't you cold?" But usually if you ask someone, "Aren't you cold?" it's more like this, "Geez, aren't you cold, you weird person?" It's not a sweet romantic-y kind of thing. What he's really asking is, "Are you warm enough?" Which is the opposite of "Are you cold?" or "Aren't you cold?" It's just the opposite way of expressing that sentiment. Here is another example, and it's straight out of something I was translating the other day. If I tell you a secret, we're gossiping, and then I lean in and I whisper, what that literally means, and if I were to translate it literally, and I have seen it translated like this, it would be, "Keep this a secret from others." Naisho is secret. Keep it a secret from others. That's not incorrect, and somebody might say that, but it's still not quite as natural when what you're really saying is, "Hey, don't tell anyone else, okay?" Another example that's extremely common, you've no doubt heard this in plenty of anime, is just the generic "Ganbarimasu." If someone is entrusting you with some kind of task and you respond with a cheerful "Ganbarimasu," that's often translated as "I'll do my best." That whole phrase, "Ganbaru, ganbarimasu," that concept is often translated as "I will do my best" or "I will try my best." That is kind of what it means. What it really means more like is to endure something. But yeah, "I'll try my best," often how it's translated, but it's not always the best way to translate it, depending on context and depending on character intent and emotion. Sometimes "I won't let you down" is actually better. And again, that's kind of the opposite way of expressing that sentiment. Rather than "I will do my best," "I will try my best," you're basically saying "I won't fail, I won't let you down." And sometimes, depending on context, that is actually the better way of translating it.
And now a word from our sponsor. Has this ever happened to you?
What am I going to do with all of this money?
Patreon can fix that.
Patreon?
If you want to support this channel, check out my Patreon. $1 gets your name in the credits. $3 gets you access to a secret monthly video. $5 gets you a song in Japanese written about you by me. And for $10, I will make you a video about anything you want me to.
Link is in the video description below. Back to you, Sarah.
So the seventh example I have of problems in translation is not necessarily in the game or anime dialogue itself, but in the title of the series. And that is when you have a title that is either in English or like half of the title is in English and half of it is still left in Japanese. I find that in general, this just doesn't work very well. And again, it's more an artistic opinion than like a correct, like, this is how you translate things. Some might argue, well, a title should not be translated at all because it is just the title of the series. But I think if you're going to translate a title, you should either translate it all the way or not translate it at all. And if the title itself is already like half translated into English because Japanese uses so many borrowed words, or they love just throwing English words into their titles and into their language, whereas we don't just throw random Japanese words into English, so it's not exactly the same. I think it's best to just translate the whole title into English. Or if the title is already in English, but it's in just bad English, I think it's better to change it into good English. So for some examples, one is Fruits Basket. Great anime series, by the way. I haven't seen the reboot yet. Let me know if you've seen the reboot and if it's any good. I don't know if I want to invest time in watching another bad reboot. Love the manga. But anyway, yeah, Fruits Basket. We wouldn't say Fruits Basket, we say Fruit Basket. It's very minor, it's dropping an S, but it automatically makes it less awkward. If there's Fruits Basket, you have this distancing from it, you don't connect to it as well. It's English, but it's not really English, doesn't make sense. By simply dropping that S, it's something that we can ingest more readily. It makes more sense to us and it resonates with us more than Fruits Basket. Another anime title that does this is Death Note. Another great anime series, by the way. Manga is also great. Highly recommend it. Now, Death Note, those words are in English, right? But note in Japanese is not note the way we think it is in English. So if you knew absolutely nothing about the series of Death Note and you just heard that there's an anime series called Death Note, you saw no pictures of it, you knew absolutely nothing about it, what would you think it's about? I personally would think that it's about like an opera singer or a siren who sings and like kills people with her voice. That kind of note. That's kind of what I would think if I'd hear Death Note. You know, the note that kills people. Or I might think of it as like a memo, like an actual note that you hand somebody. I would not think of a notebook. But in Japanese, the word note means notebook. Noto is notebook, not note. So this title, Death Note, it's not exactly English, it's English. The death part is English, but the note part is actually Japanese, even though it sounds like it's English. So a better translation of Death Note would be Death Notebook. That would really be like, okay, it's a notebook that kills people, Death Notebook. That would be so much more clear than Death Note. Now, it's hard and you run into problems when, you have the actual Death Note in the series and it has Death Note as its title of what it is called. So I understand it's a pretty tough call, and I understand why the series was called Death Note instead of Death Note Book, because then they would have had to go back and like insert into the cells, like rewrite Death Note Book on there. And even then Death Note Book is kind of weird. I would call it like the Death Scroll or the Death Diary or the Death Log or something like that. Death Book, probably. Not Death Notebook, because that's kind of weird sounding too. But yeah, Death Note just doesn't make sense. Another example is Boku no Hero Academia. Now, mostly I hear this series as My Hero Academia, which is correct. But Boku no Hero Academia, the original Japanese title, most of that's in English. Hero, Academia, those are English words. Although hero is a commonly used borrowed English word in the Japanese language, so it's Japanese and English. But yeah, if you say that title as its Japanese version, it's just weird. Boku no Hero Academia. My Hero Academia makes so much more sense. Another series, I have not seen this series, I'm not at all familiar with it, but I just was looking for anime series titles to find examples to prove this point, and I found this series called Khmer Kill, and it's Khmer Kill, technically, and Kiru can either mean kill, spoken with a Japanese accent, or Kiru, which means to slash, basically to kill somebody. So it's a cute little pun. So Kiru is technically kill in English and in Japanese. So in Japanese, the title is all in Japanese. But in English, it's really confusing because I was wondering as I saw the title first, Akame, I assumed was a character's name. I mean, it's a name, so I assumed it was some character's name, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I did a Google search then for just Khmer Kill, and I swear, in like the search results, I think it was number 2 in the search results, somebody was asking the question, what does Khmer Kill mean? So case in point, even though Akame is a person's name and kill is an English word, because there was that ga particle in the middle of those two words, it made the title nonsense, and it made it really confusing and alienating. People aren't really getting that impact from the title that they should be getting from the title. Whereas if you just made the title Akame Kills or Akame's Kill List or Murderous Akame or something, then it makes a lot more sense. And the last example of a title that was indeed translated properly was Oh My Goddess. So the original Japanese title was Ah Megami-sama. So the English translation of this series before it was actually commercially released for English release was Ah My Goddess, AH My Goddess. But when it was brought over and actually translated officially into English, the title was changed to Oh My Goddess. Now again, one character was changed, one letter was changed. Seems like a very minor change, but it can create a much bigger impact when people see that title. So Oh My Goddess comes from oh my god, an extremely common phrase that we use in English to express astonishment. Oh my god, we don't say ah my god. In Japanese, people say ah kami-sama sometimes as an expressment of like oh my god. So ah megami-sama is a play on that, and it makes sense for them. But ah, my goddess doesn't exactly work the same way in English. Ah, my goddess has more this connotation of like, I am in awe. my goddess, when really it's more like, oh my goddess. It's more that sentiment. So, oh my goddess was a better translated title of that. And the 8th mistake I see in anime subtitles, this is just a continuation of number 8 in the last video, and that is translating things too literally. So these are just more examples I've found along the way of common phrases that are translated too literally. So here's one. ちょっと無視しないでよ. Literally translated, that would be something like, hey, don't ignore me. But a more localized way of translating that will resonate more with the viewer and sound more like it was originally written in English is something more along the lines of, hey, I'm talking! Completely different literally. Same sentiment though, and I think the second one expresses that sentiment a lot better. There's more emotionality to it, more character to it. Another example, and I saw this in a movie that I was watching, it was actually an English language movie subtitled in Japanese. So the expression is gaki no kuseni. So it's a scoffing, sarcastic gaki no kuseni. Literally that means, you're just a kid. But in the context of the scene, the girl, the, teenage girl was covering up her bare chest when she was going for a swim, and the guy caught her, going for a swim in the river, and she was covering her chest, and he's like, gaki no kuseni. In the English version, though, it was, you got nothing to hide. They're expressing the same sentiment, right? You got nothing to hide, i.e., you are just a kid, you don't have boobs, is kind of the whole sentiment behind that. That's the whole subtext behind that. But the literal translation of you're just a kid doesn't have as much flavor, doesn't have as much wit as you've got nothing to hide. Another example, and I see this a lot in romantic anime especially, is when two characters are super close and the one character who's being intimidated goes, chikai. That is often translated as too close, or you're too close. And that is literally what that character is expressing. Chikai means close. But they're not exactly saying you are too close. That's just kind of stating an obvious fact. What the sentiment really is behind that is, personal space. Whoa, back off. I can't breathe. Ooh, leave room for Jesus. These translations would give that a lot more flavor. It would give the character a lot more character, depending on what kind of character that character is. And it's expanding upon that basic premise of you are too close, therefore this is what I'm going to tell you to do about it. So that concludes part 2 in my series of common mistakes I see in anime subtitles. As I continue to translate anime and watch subtitled anime, I will no doubt continue to find more examples of these so I can continue to ruin anime for the rest of you guys. Bye!
Hooey! Ow, my knees. Okay. Microphone in boob. All the most sophisticated women wear microphones in their boobs.
Okay. Ow, my knees hurt so much.